Good evening, fellow poultry keepers. Unfortunately, tonight Rip is not feeling show quality, but I want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us. And tonight we want to talk more in depth about how to start chicks off right. And tonight Alyssa is going to be leading that conversation, but we'll all be here for questions as necessary.
Very good, Jeff.
Thanks.
All right. Does that mean my turn?
Yep.
So, and I want to encourage y'all to please ask questions throughout. You don't have to wait until the end. The more interaction that we have with the audience, I think the more interesting this is, and it makes it even more relevant to you. So what I am going to be talking about today is your brooder health, the importance of the brooding phase, because the brooder is the liftoff to chick development. So essentially what happens during those first few weeks of life while they're in the brooder is going to establish how well they are later on in life. It's really the most important part because these chicks are developing quite quickly. I first want to start about the critical first 14 days. If you're seeing a lot of mortality within the first couple of days of the chicks arriving, that could be related to issues either with chick quality, the hatching process, or even shipping problems. I know at the peak of COVID, people's chicks were getting stuck in the mail for sometimes 3, 4, 5 to 7 days. And that's going to have a really big impact on your chick health. If you're starting to see mortality within the first week, so first 7 days, that's going to relate more to early brooder health. And what I mean by early brooder life, are they finding feed and water fast enough? Is it warm enough in your brooder? Things along those lines. Finding feed is really important for your chicks. So when they first come in, ideally you're going to have feed everywhere for your birds. You want it to be very easy for them to find feed. So making sure that you have plenty of feeder space. Also, if you put piles of feed on the ground, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Well, I can talk about it now. Piles of feed on the ground, or on the brooder floor. So when a chick is born, or whenever you place your chick into the brooder, we want them to find feed, but we also want them to find food that they're actually supposed to eat. So a chick is born with just an innate pecking nature. The chick doesn't know what it's pecking at, whether it's food or bedding. They're just pecking at the world to peck. So for the first couple of first couple of days,
I can raise your mic too.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Let us know if that's any better, Robert.
Yes.
So
for the first couple of days, I like to put down some kind of brown paper. If you have corrugated cardboard, that would work great. Another option would be just like brown paper, but you don't want to use a white paper because the reflection of the light on white paper can bother chicks quite a lot. Lighting is a really big stress for chicks. I was working with a gentleman out in Idaho, and he called me one day because his birds were just pecking at each other, and he lost at least, 20 chicks in a matter of a day or so. And it turns out that they had left the lights on for 24 to 48 hours, and that it pretty much frustrated the birds. So that's why we like to use the brown paper to help with light reflection. So you've got the brown paper on top of whatever bedding you choose. Talk about the bedding in a little bit. And then that way you can put these piles of food on it, and it helps them find feed faster, if that makes sense. Okay, so finding feed faster, having the birds or the feed piled around. Ideally, you're going to have your brooder turned on 24 hours before the chicks get there. That's going to allow the brooder to get warm. It helps the brooder temperature to get to where it needs to be because temperature is really important. These day-old chicks, they have while those fluffy feathers are quite cute, they have no real insulation. So again, they're going to rely on mom to keep them warm. If you don't have them with their mother, then they're relying on you to keep them warm, which is essentially the brooder, the heat source for that. So temperature is really important. You want it to be at chick level. It needs to be warm. 95 degrees is a great temperature to start at. And you want to maintain that temperature for 14 days. And then once you're at 14 days, you can start slowly decreasing the temperature 1 degree at a time. And that's going to help. And you keep decreasing the temperature until it gets to be the temperature it's going to be outside. So that's preparing these birds to go outdoors. Jeff used the word hardening them off. I think is a good way to think about that. It's basically just getting them ready, helping them get hardy, essentially. Do you want to talk about heat sources since we're on that? There are multiple different heating sources. You can use an infrared heat lamp, propane heater, but it'd be great if you had something to monitor their temperature. So like a thermometer, or I think you can get the thermometers that laser thermometers. Is that what they're called? Yeah, a laser thermometer to give you an idea of what the temperature is. And you want to do it in multiple places to make sure that they're warm. And also watching your chicks is going to help give you an idea of how comfortable or uncomfortable they are. I've got a picture of that will show, not yet, Karen, but here in a little bit.
I'm ready.
Yeah. So observation is really a huge point.
All right. You ready for questions?
Yes, ma'am. I saw that come through.
Okay. So Joe wants to know, what about them pooping in the feed if it's just in piles?
Right. So for the first couple of days, that's whenever they're going to have the feed on piles. Sorry, I should have clarified that. After those couple of days, I'd pull all of the cardboard and feed that you have off of the ground and only put feed in the feeders. So, and again, if you're seeing droppings in the feed during this first couple of days, just pull it out. Chicks are going to poop in their feed pretty much. That's just what they're going to do. They're going to climb in their feeders and they're going to poop. Pull it out. But yeah, managing that is pretty important because the more they ingest manure, things like that, that's introducing pathogens into their body, and it increases your chances for things like coccidiosis, viral arthritis, things like those kinds of viral diseases.
So let me clarify. You said the first 3 days. How many days? 2 days. You want to have the food
I do
everywhere.
it for 2 days. Yeah. Did I say 3? I'm sorry.
No. I probably just not listening. But okay. So
yeah.
There we go. There was that. And then Lloyd says that he uses a reptile thermostat for to monitor his brooder temperature.
Yeah.
So,
and I can't emphasize this enough. This is at chick level. So down where the chicks are. Everything we talk about needs to be at chick level. So quick side note, and then we'll get back onto the heat lamps. So thinking about air quality. Well, you might walk into where your brooder is and it smells fine, but if you put your head down to where the chicks are, it's going to smell pretty different. And a bird's sensitivity to ammonia is much higher than ours is. So birds or chickens start getting affected by ammonia at 10 parts per million in the air, and the human nose doesn't detect it until it's at 25 parts per million. So by the time you're smelling it, your birds are being affected. Air quality is really huge. And it can be difficult in the brooder because you want to have good air quality, but you don't want it to get too drafty and too cold because those drafts can affect your chicks too. So that's something that you really need to pay attention to. And again, watching your chick placement is going to help give you an idea of how comfortable your birds are.
is it time?
No, not yet. There are more things I want to talk about.
Okay.
Actually, go on. Yeah, maybe let's just show it. So I've referenced it like 3 times.
That's right. So,
thanks, Karen.
Bye, Jeff.
Right. So this is the proper brooding that I was talking about. And again, this goes back to observation. You can save yourself a lot of headaches by just sitting and watching your birds. Like take out your morning coffee and watch them for 5 minutes. watch their placement, how they're interacting, how they're eating, are they drinking, things like that. It'll help you catch small problems before they turn into big problems. Okay, so this picture that Karen has up here, this is for proper brooding, and these little speckles are the chicks. Yeah, there's a key there. The speckles are the chicks. You can't see my pen. The black dot is the brooder, so their heat source essentially. So you want to see birds pretty much scattered around. You want to see some eating, some drinking. You'll see some run across the brooder, just normal, comfortable chick actions. So if you have all of your chicks crowded around the brooder, so they're all under that heat source at one time, chances are it's a little too cold in your brooder. Now, the opposite of that is if your chicks are pushed away, like as far away from the heat source as they can be, then it's going to be too hot. That sometimes it can be difficult to manage depending on your brooder setup and if you're in the summer. So if you're breeding chicks outside in North Carolina, I imagine it could get kind of hot. Karen, how are your chicks? Do you know I was going to call on you?
Yeah.
So are your chicks in an outside building, or like, is it temperature regulated where they are?
So I do the first 3 weeks in my garage, so no heat or air conditioning, but
Right.
a 2-story garage, and they're on the
Yeah.
bottom level, so fairly, a little
Like
warmer than it is outside, but
yeah, August in North Carolina can be pretty
no,
hot.
I couldn't brood. I would say June is about the latest I can hatch chicks. In order for it not to be too hot inside.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. And birds can be too hot just like they can be too cold. So if they're too hot, they're gonna respirate more, they're gonna be dehydrated. It's gonna decrease their feed consumption as well, because the chicken eats for her energy or their energy requirement. And if they're hot, they're not gonna eat as much. I mean, think about like people as well. Like when it's real hot outside, do you want to eat that much? I know I don't. So
I want to just bring that back up, just because there's 2 things people don't usually talk about: that influence of bright light, draft, or noise. Like I never really, too drafty and the bright light, I don't feel like that ever really gets talked about too much.
Yeah. And that's if you're seeing your birds huddled in like a certain area, that could be related to draftiness. And again, that goes back to, we want good air quality, but we don't want air blowing on the chicks. There was a number I knew at one point, the air exchange, but I don't remember. So I probably shouldn't have brought it up.
All right.
And then light, again, it can affect the birds as well.
All right, so let's see. We're going to talk about the heating plates, because you knew this was coming. So Dennis wants to know your thoughts on the chick brooder plates. Good or bad?
Right. So I don't really have a whole lot of experience with that. I know more about like the infrared lights and the propane heaters. But I would say if the chick, was that the sweet heaters?
Yeah, there's sweeter heaters, and there's a couple of different, basically Tractor Supply has a version now, so there's a bunch that have come out. Jeff, do you have an opinion?
They're really safe, right? So the glass isn't going to break. You're not going to catch fire. The nice thing about like sweeter heaters or plate heaters is the chicks going in under kind of similar to like being in under mom. So they're calmer. They seem to rest a little bit better under plate brooders. Unfortunately, they don't make them at a very large scale, right? They'll make them up to like 50, maybe 75 birds. And, otherwise you got to put multiples in there, so, Alyssa and I work with a lot of people brooding 200, 300, 500,000 chicks at a time. They're not convenient or cost effective at that point. So those folks are switching over to infrared heaters, electric infrared heaters. Again, they're safe, no glass to break, no fires to catch, things like that. So, but yeah, the plate heaters are great, and they offer something, to a certain scale size of, poultry keepers that, we can't do on a larger scale. It just isn't an option. So I like them. I think they're great. I just wish they'd make them bigger. So
I'm not an expert in anything, but can I just tell why I use them?
Please, yeah.
So I've used the sweeter heaters since the beginning. I would say the big thing with them is it goes along with Alyssa's, is you have to watch the chicks, because light is really what attracts them, in my opinion, to that heat lamp is just as much the light as it is the heat. And so when you're using a plate heater, if the birds don't go under it, they don't discover the heat, because it doesn't radiate heat out for them to feel like, ooh, it's getting warmer. Like literally they almost need to be under it, sort of touching it, depending on what brand you have. There's a little difference. So I sometimes have to, for the first few days, have to put a little nightlight or something on, like by the plate, to track them over to the plate.
It's interesting
to make sure that they do go under it. But the other thing with the plates is they get to experience darkness. When you're heating your thing with a heat lamp, those birds never have darkness. And so when they first go outside, they can be a lot more panicked by the nightfall. Whereas when you're using the plate heaters, you can, they get to have some light and dark. They stop eating, so they honestly don't grow quite as fast for me as when they eat 24 hours a day with the heat lamps, because it's light out. But that's all. So just make sure they're using them. Make sure. And a little. Here's where the light is attractive, is because like I did it inside for a while, and so as the sun went down, the light would go down to the corner of the brooder, and they would all end up over there as it got dark, instead of under the heat plate. So that was what clued me into, oh wait, I need to make the last light be and it didn't have to be under it. It just needed to be near enough for them to be like, oh yeah, this is where it's warm. So
you bring up a really good point, Karen, and I don't know that everybody knows that, but at the end of daylight, so poultry inherently go to the last light of the day. So wherever that light is coming in, if it's not uniform, that's where a lot of crowding and piling issues in the corner come from. Like there's an outside light, a light outside the brooder, and they all go to the last light of the day. So it's important to keep your light uniform in your brooder or even a large chicken house. Right, you will need to keep your lights as uniform as possible, and they need to go out, hopefully gradually and at the same time, so they're not piling into one direction or one corner. But yeah, people don't. I find a lot of people don't realize that chickens go to the last light of the day. So that was a great point to bring up.
And Dennis says, I think the person who asked the question, that he uses a regular 60-watt bulb as well to help them for the first 2 weeks, I think, before he switches over to plate only, would be my guess as to what he's saying there. So,
okay.
All right. We'll let you move on.
Okay. Did we get the Minnesota question?
Okay. I can put that up now. I thought that was. So Amy's in Minnesota. She's brooded in the house, but she's interested in having a brooder outside in a shed where her coop is. There is electricity and it's insulated, but it stays cold. What do you think?
I would say if you're able to get a good heat source, it could be an option. I think one of my biggest concerns is that you want to brood in a shed where the coop is. How close is the coop? So these young chicks don't really have a developed immune system. If they're too close to older birds, they're going to be a lot more likely to pick up some sort of an illness. That would be my concern with doing that. I mean, and sorry, that's not exactly what you're asking. Yeah. I mean, if you can keep it warm, yeah, that's fine. Maybe an Ohio brooder would be a better option for that, where they can get underneath they can insulate and get warmer. And then your time of year is going to restrict you a little bit more.
And I'd just say, set it up like you want to set it up, and just even if you get one of those tracking thermometers, how cold does it get? How warm does it get? But do that without chicks and just see if it's, meeting Yeah. Oh,
breathing
okay.
the same air.
Yeah, hold on, I get that. So in the same shed, breathing the same air, that makes sense about disease.
Yeah, I just got to be careful. And I mean, a good management habit is you want to start with your youngest animal and then work your way to the oldest animal. And as you come back, trying to have good biosecurity. So wash your hands, try not to track in older birds' manure, things along those lines.
All right. So now we're going good now. Okay. So Scott prefers the red heat lamps himself. But as far as safety, he never uses the clamp. He drills holes in the shield and tie wire in a couple of places, and also changes the bulb every 1 to 2 months, depending on use. So that's good, because it's not just the lamp itself falling, it's the bulbs that fall out and break.
Okay.
Out of because they're the made in China, the cheap like 250 watt bulbs that are $5. They the metal screw in part can just come loose because they're very cheap.
Okay.
So switching out.
So that's definitely an issue. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you have to watch that too, because we actually got some of those red bulbs. Found out that they had a laminate applied to the glass. It wasn't actually true red glass, right? And it started peeling off, and I had no idea that they made them that way. It looked fine when I picked it up, but it was not, and it didn't last. It just was horrible. That was a horrible experience. But if you accidentally get any water on those 250 watt bulbs, they're going to pop. So you just have to be careful where the bulb is, where your waters are, things like that. Scott's right. I really do like the 250 watt infrared bulb, as long as it's got the true red glass. They work great. I've used them for 30, 40 years, and I don't have a problem with them. But I hear a lot of horror stories about, they get a little water splashed up on them, or they're not hung correctly, which Scott talked about, drilling holes, wiring them up so they can't, accidentally fall. That's all true stuff. So they are good heaters, and they work fine. You just have to manage it.
Okay. And then we're just reiterating. So Craig Hansen says that he quit using heat lamp bulbs over 5 years ago after he found one where the bulb and the base separated, like we were talking about. So now, and I think Rip uses ceramic heat emitters too. So that's sort of the reptile thing where there's no light, there's just heat. And then I'm assuming a daylight CFL, like compact fluorescent. So to give them light at the same time as the heat. So thanks, Craig. Appreciate that. All right. I think this is still relevant. So I missed who this was, but how long do you suggest to have them under full-time lights before you switch to remove the lighting? So you indicated, go ahead. I've lost you. Yeah. Alyssa, I think you're muted on your end.
Yep.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. The dog got a little crazy.
Yeah.
So is it like overhead lights, or are we talking like heat lights?
Heat lamps. Heat lamps.
lamps.
When you start reducing the temperature.
Right. And you want to start reducing the temperature slowly at day 14. And then you're going to slowly decrease it until you're at ambient temperature. So the temperature is going to be outside. And that's just kind of easing them into what it's going to be like for them to go out. Usually at week 3, depending on what it's like outside, they should be okay to go out.
Okay. And Jeff was saying that it really shouldn't matter your breed. I want to, because there's there's a lot of, difference between everybody raising the same breed and everybody raising different breeds. But they don't have to be fully feathered. They don't have to be. Go ahead.
Oh, wait a minute. All right. Let me explain. So starting at day 14, you can reduce 1 degree per day until you reach ambient temperature. Okay. So you could still be another 2 or 3 weeks. Now, if you're in the middle of July in North Carolina, it's not going to take any time at all to take away the heat lamp, right? Because you're probably already 95 degrees outside. So it's not going to be a culture shock. So, people think, oh, they got to have all their hard feathers on. They got to have, and after day 14, chicks can self-regulate temperature, right? They have the ability to self-regulate temperature. Prior to day 14, chicks do not have an ability to control or self-regulate their body temperature, right? So it's almost like they're a reptile for the first 14 days. They're basically cold-blooded. So, as long as you do it gradually, but from what I've seen, and I've had different breeds at my place, and we've always been able to harden them off from, starting day 14. Now, we always had spring birds in April. We're still in the 40s. So it took about another 2 to 3 weeks to get them hardened off. Now, I didn't drop them outside at that point either. They still had shelter, protection, etc. But they were down to ambient temperature when we did that.
I really like the term hardened off.
Well, that's the term
plant
that's used
term.
In the industry. It's called hardening off, right? So
I like it.
yeah.
And they do it for plants, not just
Yeah.
And that works. Like I said, I have almost everybody outside by week 3 just because I use GQF box brooders, and that's how long I'm comfortable having them in them. So
Because of the space.
Because of the space. And
Yeah.
they're getting tall, and it looks uncomfortable, and it's getting harder and harder to clean, the more they poop. And,
Is that battery brooder thing?
Mm-hmm.
Stackable battery brooder thing?
Yeah.
Almost any chick, except for maybe bantams, are going to have a hard time in there after 2.5, 3 weeks. They're going to be banging their head on the top.
We had one more advice from Linda about plate brooders. So on the brooder plates, she raises one end a little higher after a couple of days, and that works best. So, and then uses 2 at a time for larger hatches. But that allows, when you put it in, it allows it to be a little cooler here than it is over here. So it lets them, because I'd say
regulate their temperature a little more.
Yeah. And back to your drawing, I'm going to go back to that because I enjoy it so much. I would say one of the biggest things that that I've seen new people do is there's just not enough space for them to get away from the lamp. Do you know what I mean? That basically everybody, they've got a little tub and the light's right in the middle, and then there's water, hot water because it's under the lamp. And I mean, the chicks, there's just nowhere to be but under the light. And so
well, let's talk about heat. Or no, I'm sorry, water, since you brought water up. And that was a really good point, is you don't want that water to get too hot. So if we think about what kind of environment that bacteria like, it's going to be hot and moist, right? So if you get your water too hot and you're not keeping track of that too much, you could have a lot of growing in your water. When your chicks first come, even in sorry, I gotta stop looking at the comments.
I promise I'll put them up there for you.
No. But even so, the first water that you give them, apple cider vinegar is great. You can also add some sugar to that water too. You want to mix it up really well and make sure that it's dissolved if you can. So give that to a couple days. Apple cider vinegar acts as like a natural electrolyte source. So it's really great for that. And then the sugar, especially if they've been in the male for a little bit, is going to give them a little bit of a boost of energy. So that's their first water. And then after a couple, and you don't want that water to be cold. So keep it relatively warm too, because them drinking that cold water is going to reduce their internal body temperature. That's so after first, and then clean out that water, get the sugar out of it after the first day. You could probably leave that in there for 2 days, but again, adding sugar to that water is going to increase your bacterial growth. And water is super important. Your water consumption is going to drive feed consumption. So if they're not drinking, they're not eating.
I'm desperately trying to look up the weight of a serama so that
Yeah.
Oh, you just keep going. That's what I'm up to.
Okay.
I know they're tiny. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Where are we at next?
Here. Let's just say it one more time.
Yeah.
So
apple cider vinegar, 1 ounce per gallon. Sugar, I would say maybe 1/4 to 1/2 cup per gallon. If you're going to do the sugar, you could also use honey or molasses, something sweet like that to give them a little boost of energy. But again, the apple cider vinegar is 1 ounce per gallon. I do the apple cider vinegar the whole time they're in the brooder. That's what I do. And then I think but you can only do it for the first couple of days if that's your preference. But apple cider vinegar is pretty great.
All right. So now we're going to talk to Jeff again. So Scott says it takes a lot longer to get them out to harden off his seramas. And I want to challenge that because his adult cockbirds are 16 ounces. Do you think there's any chance that just tiny birds, just like tiny little Yorkies, need heat longer?
Could give them a jacket.
Yeah.
I'm not going to argue with Scott because I don't know seramas very well. So I can't speak specifically to that breed. I would say the majority of breeds out there, you could harden off. Well, so look, we're starting to take heat away at day 14. We're not taking all the heat away. And, so if there's heat on them for 6, even 7 weeks, that's not, but look, I don't know. Seramas may be different, and we're each going to experience different things. So, like I said, I'm not going to get into a debate with Scott because I really don't know. So he raises them. I'm going to take his word for it. And the next person who asks me about brooding seramas, I'm going to say what Scott said. They need heat longer. Okay. Until I know otherwise, I'm going with what he said.
Yeah.
So could we come up with like a rule of thumb? If they are X amount of percentage feathered, they're going to be better? Or is it more of you want to ease them into that temperature difference?
Scott's saying even his mature birds, they need some sort of help as far as temperature at or below 40 degrees.
Okay, maybe I missed Scott's comments.
It's up on the screen right now.
Okay.
But
sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, I should have said that a different way. I'm sorry, Alyssa.
Scott's not being mean. I'm being mean.
No, he's not. He's not.
And, yeah, he's being helpful.
Serama is about as small as they come, so I don't know. There's a lot I don't know about that breed, so I'm not gonna. I made a general statement for poultry in general, so I don't know.
I feel like the reason I'm sort of hammering it is because I feel like so many people, the thing you hear is not until they're fully feathered. So you've got people with 8-week-old, 9-week-old birds still in their house because they're terrified to take them outside.
No, that's not right.
Do you know what I mean? So I feel like that is more normal common than people taking them out too early.
Right.
Yeah. So they're actually doing them more harm by coddling. So when you go beyond that 6-week period of still applying significant heat, that's coddling. Okay. You're not brooding anymore. You're coddling. So sorry, that's the truth of it. Most birds will not need any heat whatsoever. Yeah. And if you use that brooder, that image that you keep popping up that you like so much, if you have heat in there and nobody's using it, that's your sign, people. They don't need it, right? They don't want it. Yeah. You're cooking them. And I've seen a lot of chicks get overheated, and too much temperature actually causes brain damage, and people don't understand that, right? And so you got to watch the signs of that brooder image, right?
And I would say that's what you hear mostly from the old timers. They don't need no thermometer. They can look at those chicks and see
just pay attention.
The temperature is right.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and again, like Jeff said, being too hot is just as bad as being too cold. It's going to really impact them. Quick little story. I got a cousin who got chicks when COVID happened. So she got her chicks and she was so excited. Like she called me probably every day that she had them. And then probably by day 10, they started to die. And it was because she kept taking them out of the heat. and giving them too much love, coddling them too much almost. So you gotta be careful on that one too.
I do have some questions about the first feed, like you talked about here. So let's get those up. So I lost who this is, but they boil eggs to give to the chick the first 3 days. I think most people agree that's okay, right?
Boiled eggs, yeah. So that's a really great appetite stimulant.
Okay.
So that's good. Plus Corid.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get excited about Corid. I'm not real familiar with it. I would, if you're going to do something like for like coccidiosis control, I would probably prefer like a raw milk or yogurt product, because what that's going to do is it's going to act as to feed the good bacteria in the digestive system to kind of help mitigate the possible coccidiosis.
So
does that make sense?
Yeah. So the good bacteria can outcompete the bad?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right. And then do you have any somebody likes Nutri-Drench and it's working well for them. That would probably be similar to your magic water, but just
what's in the Nutri-Drench
you can buy. Don't know. Jeff's going to look that up.
What's that? Nutri-Drench? I'm not going to look it up. I've looked it up before.
Okay.
If it makes you feel good, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with Nutri-Drench. I can get by just as well with a little bit of vinegar and milk, properly spaced in as I do with Nutri-Drench. But hey, that whatever works for people. So there's nothing wrong with Nutri-Drench. But this is just my opinion. Don't shoot the messenger. But I think it's an overpriced additive that you don't really need. Personally, that's my opinion.
All right. So now I get to ask a question again. Do you believe that we should treat chicks we hatch differently than chicks that come in the mail?
Are you talking in terms of like shipping stress?
Well, just we feed them different. Back when I was getting things in the mail, I would give them something special in their water. Now I don't do that. I just give them water.
Yeah. So, let's think about the chicks in the mail. So they're put into a cardboard box and they're shuffled around and they're in transit for ideally only a day, sometimes a little bit longer. So I think that's a really stressful period for them. So, and that's where adding those extra like boosts is going to be more beneficial. Because of how important the early days of chick's life is. Even if you're hatching at home like you are, I would still probably put apple cider vinegar in the water, just to help them out a little bit. But is it more important for chicks that have been in the mail? I could see the argument of being yes.
All right, you can keep going. I've got other questions, but I think we'll ask them when you get to it, because you're about to get to it. I think you're going to talk about coccidiosis, or should we stop and talk about that for a while?
We can talk about coccidiosis. I was going to talk about bedding, because we were talking about the heat lamps, and then I thought about your picture and how you had shavings, but bedding is going to tie into coccidiosis. So we'll get there. So bedding options, you've got a couple. I think the most common is probably going to be the shavings that you're going to get. While they are, they've got good absorbency, they're readily available, and they're fairly economical. Peat moss is going to be probably my Fertrell's preference. I learned that from Jeff. So the dried peat moss, it is highly absorbent. They did a trial at Fertrell before my time, and I believe it was 6 bales of shavings to 1 bale of peat moss.
Yep.
So, and I think, I can't tell you what the price difference was. I think a bale of peat moss last time I bought it was like $15. I don't know what shavings are. But if you look at how much further it goes, that's going to say a lot. And peat moss is lower in pH, which makes it naturally more antimicrobial. So it's harder for things like coccidiosis to live in it. And if you've never used peat moss and you decide to give it a try, I want to give you a heads up that it is dusty. That dustiness is going to, is not going to affect the birds negatively. It's not going to be an issue for like respiration or their respiratory tract at all. It's going to make you nuts, but it's fine for them, and they'll start dust bathing in it. They quite like it. So there are a lot of benefits to peat moss.
All right, so you have two people who agree with you the peat moss, but they, I believe, both still want to add shavings. So any problem with doing both? Looks like so Wes is saying he uses 2 bales of peat moss to 1 bale of shavings.
I would wonder why.
Ingrid said she uses it also, but with shavings. So I don't know, maybe it's just hard to give up.
Maybe. I mean, you could give it a try. I don't. I feel like that's unnecessary to manage both of them, but you can.
Tell me about the water. Once you have peat moss in your brooder, your water is never going to look like clear water again. It's going to look like you're feeding them tea. You saying that's okay?
Clean out your water.
Well, but it's 5 seconds
Yeah,
later.
it is. It's going to be frustrating, but yeah, it's going to be okay. I remember after my chicks left, my neighbor came into my garage where I was, and he was like, "What happened in there?" Because there was brown dust everywhere.
Yeah.
So I can't. Yeah. Someone asked about rice hulls. Rice hulls are a good option as well if you can get them. I think they dry pretty quickly. But in all of these different bedding options, you want to manage it, right? And again, that goes back to the ammonia. Like, are you starting to smell the ammonia at chick level, right? So where the birds are, not where you are.
Speaking of litter, this is probably the beginning of, so Linda uses puppy pads and puts her, like, for those first few days, I'm going to guess that not for, maybe she uses them the whole time. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But if you heard, I used puppy pads before, but I used the medical kind for people so that they didn't have the puppy pee attractant in them. I'm not sure if it mattered, but it made me feel better because they make disposable puppy pads for human people too, for beds and hospitals. But yeah, so she just does that for the first few days. But I don't know, works well for me. I don't know what Alyssa would think, but
I mean, I didn't know there was an attractant in the puppy pads.
Yeah, to help them.
Help them.
Know to use them. Yeah.
I mean, I would just as soon use cardboard or some kind of paper. Jeff's smiling, so I think he's got a comment on that.
No, I was laughing about the pee pads. I'm sitting here thinking they probably put a couple drops of puppy pee on those pads before you buy them, so the dogs know where to. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So, it is. That's exactly it. Attractant. So, all right. So Linda said, or Ingrid clarifies, she uses peat moss to begin with, and then she adds the shavings, and then peat moss. So it's sort of, she's got a layering effect.
Like a sandwich.
There. So, all right. So Lloyd wants to know how to use peat moss. When you buy at Home Depot, they come in like compressed cubes. Exactly. You break it up and spread it around.
Yep. That's exactly how you do it.
It's actually, okay after the chicks are a couple weeks old, you don't have to break it up. They like the clumps. So if there's a big clump in there, they all play king of the mountain. Like one will jump up on top and the others try and knock it off. And it's hilarious, you know. And if you can't find humor with your chickens, quit raising chickens. All
right. So hold on. We got some more bedding choices. Horse pellet bedding after the first 2 weeks. So I think that's the compressed pine.
Yeah.
Pellet.
So I'm not a huge fan of, I don't like them for horse bedding because I don't think it looks very comfortable. That's my thing about it. I don't know how absorbent they are, but I mean, it could be fine. I wonder if you're feeding a pelleted feed, if they get confused about that.
The horse pellet bedding, as far as I know, is like a number 6, a 6 millimeter dye. It's much bigger. So especially first or after the first 2 weeks, I'd say it's just, but it basically turns into sawdust once it's wet. So I mean, how does sawdust work for bedding?
Yeah, sawdust is not the top choice. I would say the top choice is going to be the peat moss, and then I think rice hulls and shavings are pretty close.
One more, and then I won't ask you about any more bedding types. Construction sand. So there's a lot of sand as bedding and runs and brooders, and that's.
I don't actually have an opinion on that.
Okay,
Jeff, what's your opinion?
I'm not a big fan of sand. I hear about it a lot. A lot of people like to use it. It's easy to kind of clean, but it doesn't hold moisture. You know, it dries out pretty quickly. So I think that's why people like it. It's easy for the birds to scratch in. But I kind of want something of a carbon material. Everything else is peat moss and pine shavings. Everything is like a natural, and it neutralizes the ammonia out of the urate. So I think it's going to manage the ammonia smell better, the peat moss and so on. Whereas the sand doesn't have anything to neutralize. There's no carbon to neutralize the ammonia. So that would be the only drawback for sand for me.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm going to spout something from a podcast, from somebody that you may not believe in, but Peter Brown, the chicken doctor, very much does not like sand because he says it kills the sharpness of the sand, kills the coccidiocysts. So you end up with sort of like they can't get that little bit of cocci they need back to build the defense, because you're basically they're pooping into something that's killing that will rip open the little oocysts. So you end up with sort of a sterile brooder. And then when they go outside for the first time, they're hit with a giant dose as opposed to getting it a little bit at a time as baby chicks. So just spouting what somebody else said.
Okay.
All right. So we're still on cocci. I gotta go way up back to the top here. So there we go. Can you explain to people the difference in oocysts in mature coccidia and how they sporulate and become infective? I see a lot of confusion on the subject.
Right. That's a really great question that I'm not able to answer. Unfortunately, I'm not a microbiologist. That's a really interesting question, but unfortunately, I don't know.
I've never dug into it to that level either. I mean, now you're talking about, a biologist breaking it down. I haven't looked into the life cycle of Coccidia protozoa and, how they sporulate the oocyst. So I don't have a good answer.
Since I can't see Facebook user, if you can type in and tell us, then we'll put it up there for everybody to see.
Yeah,
but make it in little chunks. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting question.
Okay. So this person thinks moisture and buildup of droppings contribute to coccidiosis. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. So that, and if your chicks are going to scratch and peck at the ground, and the dirtier, moisture it is, the more likely they are to pick up some kind of issue, whether that be coccidiosis or something else. But yeah, I agree with you. Moisture and buildup of droppings definitely contributes to that. So paying attention to your bedding is going to be, again, that observation. Like, how does it look in there? How does it smell? I'd bet if you see a lot of moisture and a lot of accumulation of droppings, it's not going to smell good in there. So
I know I said I wouldn't do any more bedding questions, but there is a big new push on coffee ground. They're selling them now as chicken coop litter. Any
is
idea?
It because they're low in pH?
I don't know. It's because they can package them into a package, and people will pay money for a waste product. Which is not a bad thing. I mean, that's a good thing, but they are expensive. But
are they?
I know on the Facebook groups, people are worried about, is it staining your birds, and are they going to eat them? Is it bad for them if they ate a bunch of used coffee grounds? I'm assuming they're rinsed and everything else because they're packaged. They have to be dried. I mean,
yeah.
But
so what I know about coffee is it's got a lower pH, and that goes similar to the peat moss. It's harder for coccidiosis to live in that, or coccidia. I'm not sure. Anyhow, we get stuck on that protozoa to live in. I guess I'm going to say that. But I don't know. I haven't heard about anybody using the coffee grounds. Okay. So even if they're used, I imagine there's still some caffeine in there, isn't there? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what they do on that.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's been going around, but I feel like this is the first year that's really popped with a lot of people wanting to ask. So yes, any residual caffeine is deadly to birds. It's stained and is extremely deadly. So dusty, not deadly. Yeah. Dusty.
Thank you for that input. Yeah.
So yep. All right. All right. So other people are helping each other out. I don't think we have to show them all on there. So
Yeah.
but you guys look who the experts are and what they're saying, and take it, use it. So
Yeah.
all right.
Do you want me to keep going?
Yep.
Okay, so we've covered feed, water. Oh, we haven't covered feed. We'll cover feed in a minute. But I wanted to go. We talked a little bit about space and how important space is. Yeah.
I'm just laughing at people's jokes, so I'm just putting them up there.
Yeah. So your living space, you want to start at 1/4 square foot per chick for the first week, and then you want to increase that spacing every week by 1/4 foot. When you first get your chicks, again, we talked about how important it is for them to find feed faster. So one way to help encourage them to find feed and water faster is if you crowd them. So limit how much space they're getting. You're not giving them the full size of the brooder. Crowd them to 1 square foot per bird. So 4 birds per square foot. 1/4 square foot. Yeah. Did I say that right?
I don't know. I was reading the comments.
Okay, so I'm going to say it one more time. Sorry, guys. 1/4 square foot or 4 chicks per square foot for the first. You would do that for the first week. So that's living space, feeder and water space equally as important. Ideally, your birds are going to be able to eat comfortably. They're not climbing all over each other. 1 linear inch of feeder and water space per bird, and then you want to increase that 1/4 inch weekly.
And I just want to say it again for brand new things. There is, like you said, 4 chicks per 1 square foot. There is a minimum brooder size. Like if you literally had 4 chicks, you can't have a 1 square foot brooder.
Please don't do that. Yeah.
Week. So I mean, because they have to be able to get out of the water and whatever. So I mean, just remember there is a minimum size for brooders that.
Yeah. So and when you're planning your brooder, I would plan for worst case scenario. So let's say your goal is to get them out at 3 weeks. You don't know what the weather is going to be like in those 3 weeks. But if you have an unseasonably cold and wet day, you might have to leave them in for another full week. Plan to have them in there for 4 weeks when you're building it. It's better to have too much space than not enough.
Okay. Respond. Just
yeah. That's a really great point. Because I thought sustainability was mentioned somewhere in the comments, and I mean peat mosses are really great for like adding to compost or to a garden, especially if you've got manure in there. Space, super important. All right, let's talk a little bit about feed. Feed and good nutrition is going to be fundamental to your success. You could have the best brooder with the best setup, but if you don't have good nutrition, then your birds aren't going to have that natural immunity, and they aren't going to be as hardy, I guess is how I want to say that, much more susceptible to getting sick. So your chick starter feed, and I should have sent this to you, Karen, I apologize because I had a little chart up. You're looking for about a 20% protein. I know some breeds will even go up to 22%, but that's crude protein. And your protein source is only as good as your amino acid profile. So what does that mean? Proteins are made up of amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So when you're looking at feeds, you want to look at the methionine and lysine levels in that feed to help determine how adequate it is. For a chick starter feed, like a 0.5% methionine level is great. 1 to 1.1% lysine is going to be good for that. Well, let me pull that up, see what other I got. Other things that we look at is going to be the energy, but you're not going to necessarily see that on a feed tag. So feed tags only have to have, and this is going to vary by state, crude protein, fat, fiber, usually your calcium levels, phosphorus, and then oftentimes for poultry, it's going to have methionine. Does lysine have to be on that tag, Jeff?
That was my understanding, is that you had to have the lysine as well. And, a lot of people send me tags and I can't believe what's not on there. So It's crazy, and the state has some authority as far as what has to be on the tag, but at the end of the day, it's actually AFCO, American Association of Feed Controls Officials, that governs the entire United States as far as what has to be on that poultry tag. So the same rules that you and I live by for what we label here is universal across the U.S. But again, I'm seeing tags come through with nothing more than crude fat, fiber, and protein. And in Canada, it's completely different. So it's they don't have to give their list of ingredients, and their guarantees are completely different than ours. It's crazy.
Yeah, and you should be able to ask if you're getting it from a local feed mill. Ask them.
A lot of them don't know.
They don't.
They really don't know. Yeah, they don't. Okay, so a lot of the small mom and pop feed mills don't have nutritionists, so they're relying on a larger company like Cargill ADM,
right.
One of their suppliers, somebody like us at Fertrell, right? How many formulas do we make for feed mills? And if we don't, and if we don't help them with their labels, they don't know what's supposed to be on the label. So, in their world, everything's labeled with crude protein, crude fat, crude fiber, right? And that's what they know. And if the state officials aren't keeping up with it, that's all you get. So that's
I think that's how to get ingredient. So I kind of lost my train of thought there. But yeah, usually like if you're looking at your feed tag, just try to look for those nutrient levels. That's going to be your best option. Ideally, it's kind of hard to say because people are all over the country. And then there's the question of, is mash better? Is a pellet better? A mash is going to be a little bit easier to understand what's in your feed because you can hide a lot in a pellet, but I also understand how pelleting feed can be easier as well because it's uniform. But mash is always going to be a preferred.
Well, you pretty much have to start with a mash, don't you? I mean, baby chicks. I mean, you're going to start with either mash or powder. I mean,
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I didn't get a chance to warn Alyssa that in a group of people with fancy fowl, they don't want anything to do with mash feed, right? They have all been brainwashed to believe their birds will only eat pellets. They're going to waste mash, and it doesn't work, right?
I did not know this was an anti-mash group.
Yeah, I should have reviewed your notes and warned you.
Look at this. Darlene right here wants to know if aren't a good bit of nutrients lost in the pelleting process?
They can be.
Yeah. Like probiotics have a hard time surviving pelleting, right? Because of the temperature. People don't realize pellets get up to close to 300 degrees going through that dye. I mean, you've measured yours, Karen, on your small pellet mill. And
156. That's the highest I've ever gotten it.
Yeah, that's when they drop out the other side, and you're not pushing it, right? No. You're not working it hard.
Yeah, but in a real pellet mill, they're using steam. I mean, they add steam ahead of they warm it up to mush and then through, and then so they spray their probiotics on afterwards if they're going to claim they have probiotics. Yeah. But no, Jeff, we're going to argue right here.
Okay.
Joe, pellets are crap.
Yeah.
Is that Jeff? Did you put that on that group?
Yeah.
I did not.
I
did not. That was Joe, but Joe had proper education on how to feed his birds back when he was still young at this. He also just made me
swear on the live stream. So
I'm sorry.
He did it, not me, not you. So anyway. All right. And I would say a lot of people do this and too much, but Scott adds a lot to his bagged feed. So too much to write. So I would say a lot of people tinker. A lot of people start with a feed and then they add what they want to it.
Yeah. And to a certain extent, I think that that's reasonable, but you have to look at what you're adding and is it diluting down the nutrients that they're needing out of that feed? So let's say you're giving them 20% complete feed, and they really like ground corn or something like that. So you're adding corn to this feed, and that's decreasing the protein. So they're not getting the essential nutrients they need to help with growth. It's going to slow them down. Also, like the vitamins and minerals are getting diluted down as well.
And most off-the-shelf feeds are already short on vitamins and minerals for the birds anyway, because they're trying to keep costs down. So, they've already cut them to like the bare minimum. And so just know that going into it.
And age. Sorry, keep going.
Everything you add to it, I mean, any type of grain that you add to it or anything, you're diluting the vitamin content for sure, more than likely diluting down the mineral content. So just be careful.
So make sure whatever you're adding is balanced in and of itself. If not, and pushes it up, not down. Yeah. Or trial and error over many, many years. So I'm going to say that's an option. So
experience is the best teacher, unfortunately.
All right. How about somebody has to, you can't get out without this one. So medicated versus non-medicated feed.
So a little bit about my background is I work for an organic feed supplement company. And in organic agriculture, we're not allowed to use medication. So I'm always going to be partial to non-medicated because I feel if you are feeding a well-balanced feed and you're having proper management and good brooder management in terms of like keeping up with the bedding, things along those lines, you don't need to feed medicated feed. And if we're concerned about coccidiosis, some coccidiosis preventative actions could be offering milk to your birds. I think it was day 3, day 7, and day 10 to help with prevention. I think 3, 7, and 10.
3, 7, and 10 are for Cornish cross or commercial breeds, Alyssa.
Oh, okay.
I've gone with 3, 7, 14, and 21 because heritage breeds actually get their coccidiosis a week later than a Cornish cross does. Okay. So yes, you can see it as early as day 14, but more than likely it's going to be day 21 to day 28 for most of the heritage breeds before they start exhibiting signs of coccidiosis. Mm-hmm. But as a general, just kind of, I want to do something to prevent it. Mm-hmm. A little bit of milk on day 3, day 7, day 14, day 21, whatever the birds, enough space that all the birds can drink at the same time, whatever they clean up in about 45 minutes to an hour works great.
All right. We have to disclose now for Matthew. Alyssa, where do you work?
I work for the fur trail company.
Jeff, where do you work?
The same.
Okay. I don't work for a feed company.
I was going to say, Karen, where do you work?
That's just not been an option for me yet. So,
yeah.
You looking for a job? I tried to hire you earlier today. Come on.
Did. 6 o'clock this morning. He's trying to see if I want to move to Pennsylvania.
I tried.
Do you want to know what our temperatures have been before you make that decision?
No, I didn't need any extra education to say no.
Okay.
All right. So let's see. Hold on. We got some more here. So what are your opinions on, I'm going to say purchasing grains and minerals separate and mixing your own feed? If it's supposed to be purchasing, I don't know what that means. So help me, but I think it's purchasing.
Yeah. I think if you have the feed ingredient, if you have the time that needs to go into it, you have the feed ingredients available, and it's something you're interested in doing and you can come up with a good ration, I think that's a fine idea. But I also really want people to understand that that's time consuming and you have the equipment to do it. Like Karen, how many hours a week do you put into making your own feed?
Less than 2 when I have the right number of birds and more than 2 during grow out season. So,
okay. And how much equipment do you have for that?
Like number of equipment or amount of money in the equipment?
Ooh, whatever you want to give. Basically, I'm trying to show like it's not a necessarily.
Yeah. So you need a mixer of some sort, and you need a grinder that makes your stuff the right size for whomever you're feeding. Or you skip the grinder and you buy a pellet mill instead. That's my vote. But but not whole. I mean, but yeah, you need bins to hold all the raw ingredients and then stuff to put it into after you've mixed it together, and a scale, some buckets. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, if you're interested in making your own feed, we'll definitely we can explore that option, but a lot goes into it. So
yeah, I was gonna say the only thing I'd say is don't believe any of the get your 3 ingredients in a trash can and mix them together one and one and make it and it's balanced. So but it's not difficult. It's a recipe like anything else. You just follow it. But make sure you have access to all the ingredients before you start down that path. So
definitely, do a lot of research first.
All right. So if commercial feed is all that's available, we have to go here.
Yeah.
As Darlene says, so is all that available to you? Can you add anything like the breeder supplement? And when would you start adding supplements if you choose to?
If commercial feed is all that, I know you just read it. I need to read it again.
That's okay.
Yes, I think it's going to be the short answer for the reasons that Jeff said, and also I think the age of it as well. So how long has that feed been sitting on the shelf? Vitamins aren't super stable, so after a certain amount of time, they start to deplete. So age is really relevant. If you're feeding the breeder supplement for breeding season, was it 30 days before breeding season you start feeding the breeder supplement?
21 anyway. 21. Yeah, at least 21 days before you want to collect the first egg.
Yeah.
I was thinking she might have been talking about chicks. Like, do you start it on day one?
You can actually start.
Sure, but
no, you can start as a chick, and so the ratio always works out to 2.6 grams of breeder supplement per 4 ounces of feed, right? So that remains constant. That's 10 grams per pound. So all the way up through rearing, the supplement is showing really great response, to how quickly the birds grow and, how develop the whole bit. And they start showing attributes, 3 to 4 weeks early by the time you're up to 8 weeks old. So you can use it from day one.
So Wes here helps us out. He mixes his feed daily and takes him about 30 minutes per day to make his feed. Not sure for how many birds, but I use a bucket and a drill and paddle to mix. Works great. So, yeah, I think.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Not sure. Maybe this is the supplement, but would you agree it'd be very important to start as a chick? Yes, baby chicken should start off as baby. No, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to help develop their immune system, so for sure.
All right. So Craig, with his Bantam Cochins, he did tell us that he uses a blender to make his crumbles smaller for the first 2 weeks.
Okay, that makes sense.
So that makes sense to make it smaller. All right. I'll look through the comments. Did you have anything else to say?
No, we've pretty much covered everything that I wanted to talk about.
And it's 1:08, so that's where Rip would starting to be uncomfortable right about now. I'm going to put this up because Matthew decided to ask, so let's ask. So anybody know of a place I can find information on breeding heritage turkeys? Such as a ration for breeding age birds, examples of record books, selection, etc. So I know you guys can help with some of that. You guys have any breeding turkey rations?
I do. That part of it we can cover, so Matthew can reach out to me once I know where he's at and what he can get. And I can help him with the turkey breeding rations and all the different phases.
Do you have breedings in the book or just?
Yeah.
You have turkey breeder in that book?
Well, I believe I do. There should be a heritage turkey breeder in there.
Yeah. And it's going to be similar principle, right? You're going to increase the vitamin levels, increase the amino acids.
Yeah. So standard bred turkey grower.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Karen, you think you can get any more little tabbies on that book or what?
There's only 3 tabs.
Okay.
I could get a lot more tabs.
All right. Do you need to send me? Do you need me to send you another book so you have multiple reference copies?
I have 2 versions right here. That's
Okay.
enough for that. That's enough. So information on breeding them. Don Schreider wrote the Stories Guide to Breeding Turkeys, and I trust him when it comes to anything about breeding. So I try to get the Stories Guide out there. If anybody has any help in the comments for him, but selecting birds, I mean, make sure you're following Frank Reese. And the Livestock Conservancy does a decent amount on turkeys. So you might check them out too. Sorry, I don't know of anybody brilliant to send you to instantly, but that was what that. Oh, hide. Okay. Yep. Wes agrees. Stories Guide to Raising Turkeys is a good book.
Great.
All right. Custom. Well, might as well ask. There's only one custom feed mill in Massachusetts where they live. Is that a good company?
I'm not familiar with them. I don't really know about many feed mills up in that New England area. Jeff, you're muted.
Okay. See. All right, Jeff, you're muted. I can't.
That's a good thing because I said I really don't want to say anything negative about another feed company in public. So
okay. So you don't have an opinion.
So call him later.
I do, but I'd rather not go on the record recorded about Poulin or do more. So
well, and not having access to a good feed mill is a good reason to try your own. So
yeah. It is. Especially for breeding turkeys.
That. And now I feel as if Rip has awoken because that is a Rip answer. I'm positive. Matthew, go to archive.org and search for books on turkeys from some good older reference books on breeding turkeys.
Perfect.
So
thanks, Rip.
But all right, that is basically all of our questions.
Awesome.
We want to talk about next week. Jeff?
That was a good hour. Yep.
Yep.
So do you have that little thingy that Rip put together? But yeah, so folks, next week we want to talk about
2 weeks, I guess. February 22nd.
In 2 weeks, we want to talk about weighing chicks and the importance of weighing chicks. And so the years that I've been working with heritage breeders or breeders in general, there is no compiled data on what each breed of chicken weighs each week of its life. And for someone who's trying to help you, if there was a baseline of information, this would be really critical. And that's really what we want to talk about next week. We're looking for folks who are willing to weigh small groups of birds, record them based on their breed each week, once a week, weigh 10 birds, all the way up through the rearing.
Don't tease it.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
We're going to talk about
I don't know.
He can't tease.
I can't. I don't know how.
Tell him at any point what we're going to talk about, and he'll start talking about that subject.
I can't help it. Sorry.
He can't.
That's 2 weeks subject. Okay?
There you go.
Weighing chicks. We want people to join the club.
Right. But you're going to tell them why it's a good idea too, right? You're not just going to ask them for things. You're going to.
Well, we're going to tell them all that in 2 weeks.
Right? There you go. Exactly.
Okay.
So, all right. Thank you all. I appreciate you showing up and being patient with us without Rip. Hopefully he's going to recover quickly. Oh, look.
Yes.
Somebody enjoyed it, and Darlene is excited about weighing. So
awesome.
Kylie's going to set her reminder now. So
that's great.
Nice.
It was a good show. Thanks everybody for coming. Have a nice evening.
Yep. Thank you for the questions.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation by Poultry Keepers 360. All rights are reserved. This production has been made possible in part through the generous support of the Fur Trail Company, manufacturers of gardening and livestock products that are better naturally.